Thank you, Professor Glendon. It's now my pleasure to introduce one of my oldest and dearest academic friends, Rabbi Dr. David Dalin, who's Professor Emeritus of History and Politics at Ave Maria University. Rabbi Dalin has been a visiting professor at the Jewish Theological Seminary and at George Washington University and at Stern College of Yeshiva University up here in New York. He's also been the Talbeh Research Fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University, and I'm delighted to say a visiting fellow at the James Madison Program in American Ideals and Institutions at Princeton. Rabbi Dalin, who received his PhD from Brandeis University, is the author of a number of books, including Icon of Evil, subtitled Hitler's Mufti and the Rise of Radical Islam, and most recently, a wonderful book, Jewish Justices of the Supreme Court from Brandeis to Kagan. Please join me in welcoming Rabbi Dr. David Dalin.
I want to thank Professor George for his kind introduction. In the 2 decades immediately following the end of World War II and the Holocaust in 1945, anti-Semitism was widely believed to have been on the sharp decline in Western Europe and England. The end of the Holocaust, it was assumed, made Jew hatred, once endemic to Europe, now taboo in every country where anti-Semitism had once been strongest. This assumption, of course, turned out to be tragically incorrect. There has been a resurgence of anti-Semitism in Europe that 50 years ago would never, ever have been predicted. Now, much but not all of contemporary anti-Semitism in Europe has been the product of the Islamization of Western Europe and the growth of Muslim-based Jew hatred in countries such as France, Belgium, Denmark, Sweden and England. In 1945, there were fewer than 1 million Muslims living in Europe. Between 2000 and 2016, Muslim immigrants from the Middle East and North Africa, now numbering more than 16 million in Western Europe and England, took the lead in inciting and perpetuating most, but not all, of the physical violence against European Jews. Many political observers and commentators have noted that there has been a new anti-Semitism and a new era of anti-Semitic violence in contemporary Europe. But as Jeffrey Goldberg, in his much discussed April 2015 Atlantic Monthly article, "Is it time for the Jews to leave Europe?" has pointed out, quote, "What makes this new era of anti-Semitic violence in Europe different from the previous ones is that traditional Western patterns of anti-Semitic thought have now merged with a potent strain of Muslim Judeophobia. According to those who track it, most of the anti-Semitic violence in France, the epicenter of Europe's Jewish crisis, appears to come from Muslims who number Jews now 10 to 1, unquote. Now, France's 475,000 Jews represent less than 1% of France's population, yet a 2014 survey by the European Jewish Congress found that France had more violent anti-Semitic incidents in 2013 than any other country in the world. Now, Jeffrey Goldberg documents the fact that tens of thousands of European Jews are now planning to leave Europe. This is especially so in France, where over the past 4 years, the pace of anti-Semitic violence and Jewish immigration from France has been accelerating continuously. From being the largest Jewish community in Europe at the beginning of the decade, with a population of about 500,000, it is expected that it will fall to 400,000 or less within a few years, with tens of thousands of more Jews leaving France each year for Israel and for the United States. France's chief rabbi, Chaim Corsia, recently confirmed that the rising anti-Semitism has been causing a historically unprecedented exodus of large numbers of French Jews. In France, Germany, Denmark, Sweden, and England, The public display of the traditional Jewish head covering, known by most Jews today as a yarmulke or a kippah, and other Jewish religious symbols has more than occasionally resulted in violence against Jews. Reports abound in recent years of French Jews being advised not to wear a kippah in public because to do so might make them target for violent attacks from Muslims. The vast majority of these attacks were not random, but rather directed at conspicuously religious Jews wearing kippot in public, often on the way to or from religious worship services at their synagogues. As a result, European Jews have become afraid to wear symbols of their religious faith, such as the kippah, in public. This fear has become especially prominent amongst the Jews of France. A recent poll found that 74% of French Jews who wore traditional kippot in public reported being targeted for attack. In Paris, in Berlin, Brussels, Copenhagen, Amsterdam, and London, there have been increasing incidents of Jews wearing their kippot being attacked walking to or from synagogue. In 2012, the Israeli ambassador to Denmark, Arthur Avnon, advised visiting Israelis in Copenhagen against obvious displays of their religion, such as wearing the kippot or even speaking Hebrew in public. In Berlin and Copenhagen, as well as in the Swedish town of Malmö, Jews wearing a Star of David necklace in public have been targeted for attack. But it has not been only Muslims whose anti-Semitism has threatened the religious liberty and religious practice of European Jews. Laws or parliamentary resolutions prohibiting or infringing on the religious practices have also surfaced throughout Western Europe. In both Germany and in Britain in recent years, political activists, especially on the secular left, have publicly advocated outlawing Jewish religious circumcision, the traditional Brit Milah, that is a central tenet of Jewish religious faith and practice. 2/5 of Britons and up to 3/4 of all Germans now oppose Jewish ritual circumcision. In Great Britain also, there has been growing publicly voiced opposition, including by secular left members of the Labour Party in Parliament, to Jewish ritual circumcision and to the public display of Jewish religious symbols. In response, there has been a growing recognition within the British Jewish community that such opposition to Jewish ritual circumcision and to the religious obligation of individual Jews to wear a kippah in public, these infringe upon the free exercise of religion cherished by all British Jews. Now, kosher ritual slaughtering, another tenet of Jewish religious practice, is likewise under threat in Western Europe. In 2014, Denmark's parliament passed a blatantly anti-Jewish law banning shechita, that is kosher ritual animal slaughtering, and also banning kosher butchers. Almost 3/4 of French men and women and almost 1/2 of Britons advocate a complete ban on shechita as well. In 2013, François Fillon, then the Prime Minister of France, went so far as to urge French Jews to renounce, quote, ancestral traditions with not much meaning nowadays, such as kosher slaughtering. These and other threats to the religious liberty of French Jews have increased in number. Now, since the Second Palestinian Intifada, or uprising against Israel beginning in 2000, and the growing Islamization of Europe during the past 2 decades, much of the resurgence of anti-Semitism in Western Europe and England has been inextricably related to radical Islamic hatred of Israel and to the growing support for the Palestinian cause amongst much of Western Europe and England's political left. The situation for the Jews of France, England, and Western Europe deteriorated further after 2002, in response to a new Palestinian campaign of terror against Israel, which caused an escalation in anti-Israel demonstrations and anti-Jewish violence throughout Europe. In Belgium, firebombs were thrown into a synagogue in Brussels, and a Jewish bookstore was almost destroyed by arsonists. In Antwerp, a synagogue was firebombed with Molotov cocktails, and a travel agency specializing in trips to Israel was set afire. Now, in 2002, as well as in the following 14 years, France led Europe in anti-Jewish violence. Buses carrying Jewish school children were stoned. Jewish cemeteries were desecrated. Synagogues, Jewish schools, and kosher markets were defaced and firebombed. The Or Aviv synagogue in Marseille was burned to the ground, its prayer books and Torah scrolls destroyed by fire. Over the next decade and more, French Jews became ever more fearful for their safety, their security, and religious freedom, as anti-Semitic violence, including a 2012 attack on a Jewish school in Toulouse, in which 4 people were murdered at point-blank range by a French-born jihadist trained in the Middle East, caused widespread fears and uneasiness throughout the French Jewish community. Now, the worst fears of France's steadily already tense Jewish community were realized on Friday, January 9th, 2015, when a French Muslim gunman who had sworn allegiance to ISIS, armed with a submachine gun and an assault rifle, attacked a kosher supermarket in East Paris, murdering 4 Jewish shopkeepers and holding 15 other Jews as hostages. You may remember this from the news last year, 2 years ago. This vicious attack on the eve of the Jewish Sabbath sent shockwaves throughout the Jewish community of France. As the hostage siege unfolded, police ordered the closure of all shops in the tourist-filled Jewish neighborhood in central Paris, far from the kosher supermarket under siege in East Paris. And for the very first time in recent French history, in advance of Sabbath worship services that very Friday night, the iconic Grand Synagogue of Paris was closed. Now, the summer of 2014 Israeli-Palestinian conflict in Gaza precipitated an immediate spike in anti-Israel demonstrations and related violence against French, German, British, and other European Jews. An especially distressing event relating to the conflict took place in Germany, when earlier this year, on January 13th, 2017, a German regional court ruled that there was no anti-Semitism in an attempt by a group of Muslim men to burn down a synagogue in the small German city of Wuppertal during the summer 2014 Israeli conflict in Gaza. By this court ruling, the German legal system essentially affirmed that German synagogues are legitimate targets for violent attacks by Muslims who may be angry with Israel, and that such attacks should not be considered anti-Semitic, but rather understandable forms of political protest. Now, while France has been at the forefront of Jew hatred and anti-Semitic violence during the past 16 years, England has not been far behind. Already in 2002, the British columnist Petronia Wyatt observed with dismay, since September 11th, she wrote, anti-Semitism and its open expression has become respectable in London dinner tables. Indeed, Wyatt recounts being told by a Liberal Labour Party member in the House of Lords, quote, "The Jews have been asking for it, and now we can say openly, finally, what we think at last of them." As the British Jewish journalist Melanie Phillips has persuasively argued, Great Britain, and especially London, has been a major center of European anti-Semitism for more than 2 decades. Now, since the 1960s, Jew hatred has been fanned throughout the Islamic world and throughout Western Europe and England by the mass circulation of Arabic translations of notorious anti-Semitic publications, including the Protocols of the Elders of Zion and Hitler's hate-filled and viciously anti-Semitic autobiography, Mein Kampf. It is interesting to note that there are now more Arabic editions of Mein Kampf than German editions. Although the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, an infamous forgery dating back to Tsarist Russia that purported to document the existence of a secret Jewish cabal or conspiracy to rule the world, has been discredited since the 1920s, it continues to be accepted as authoritative scholarship by the Muslim communities in London and in Western Europe. Arabic editions of both the Protocols and Mein Kampf are always available on open display in bookstores in London's Muslim neighborhoods, where they are featured actually and promoted along with books devoted to Holocaust denial and to the vilification of Israel. Now, in addition to the plethora of anti-Jewish publications available in British Muslim bookstores in recent years, there has been a rise in physical attacks on British Jews, attacks on synagogues, and the desecration of Jewish cemeteries. In 2004 alone, the Community of Security Trust, a Jewish defense organization, recorded 532 anti-Semitic incidents in Great Britain. In his high holiday message to British synagogues in 2005, then British Chief Rabbi Sir Jonathan Sacks warned of a new anti-Semitism in England and of a tsunami of anti-Semitism that was rapidly engulfing Europe. Rabbi Sacks's prophetic warning has been reiterated more than once over the past decade. In country after country in the past 16 years, the European left has been at the forefront of the resurgence of anti-Semitism, much of it related to the left's hatred of Israel and passionate support of the Palestinians. Indeed, sympathy for the Palestinians and opposition to Israel's legitimacy and very existence as a nation state has become a litmus test for many on the European left, a defining marker of what it means to be a progressive. European anti-Semitism used to be a problem primarily of the political right. In recent years, however, throughout Western Europe and England, anti-Semitism has increased significantly amongst the leaders of the political left, who have often enthusiastically joined forces with European Muslims in pro-Palestinian political activity and in inciting and supporting hatred and violence against Europe's Jews. In France, at pro-Palestinian rallies where chants of death to the Jews were heard, to cite only one example, the Muslim leadership of the rallies were joined by the leftist officials of various French organizations. Now, the resurgence of anti-Semitism within the European political left has in recent years been most evident within the British Labour Party, which has now lost the support of a growing number of British Jewish voters. Under the leadership of Jeremy Corbyn, who may very well become the next Prime Minister of England, a virulently pro-Palestinian critic of Israel, Corbyn, who has praised the Palestinian Islamic terrorist organization Hamas, which governs Gaza, for its commitment to what he calls peace, social justice, and political justice. Anti-Semitism has become more open under his leadership. Anti-Zionism and virulent anti-Israel rhetoric, usually bordering on the anti-Semitic, has become a central tenet of Corbyn and his supporters' left-wing politics. Under Corbyn's leadership, Britain's Labour Party has become the party of left-wing anti-Semitism, while Corbyn himself has come under widespread criticism for his close association with left-wing supporters accused of Holocaust denial and of anti-Semitism and terrorism. In response, during the 2015 national elections, a majority of British Jews for the first time voted for the Conservative Party. Now, for many years prior to the Six-Day War of June 1967, Labour had been Britain's most pro-Zionist political party. This began to change when support for Palestinian statehood entered Labour Party policy in the early 1980s. When Corbyn was first elected to Parliament in 1983, he became a sponsor of the Labour movement's Campaign for Palestine, a new British group that was pledged to eradicate Zionism and regarded Israel as a colonial project. Over the next 3 decades, Corbyn and his fellow left-wing leaders of Britain's Labour Party labeled Zionism a racist ideology similar to apartheid. He also greeted visiting delegations from Hamas and Hezbollah as, quote, our friends. Anti-Semitism within the British Labour Party long preceded Jeremy Corbyn's election to the party leadership in 2015. Now, in the wake of the Iraq War in 2003, when British Prime Minister Tony Blair publicly supported the Bush administration, a longtime left-wing Labour MP publicly accused Prime Minister Blair of being unduly influenced by a cabal of Jewish advisors. Ken Livingstone, a Labour Party MP and a notorious anti-Israel propagandist who has long espoused explicitly and open anti-Semitic views, served 2 controversial terms as the Mayor of London from 2000 to 2008, and was subsequently, it's interesting, expelled from the Labour Party in April 2016 for anti-Semitic comments, including praise for Adolf Hitler. More than 20 moderate Labour MPs called for Livingstone's expulsion, vilifying him as a disgusting Nazi apologist. In conclusion, now, during the 19th century, most of French and British anti-Semitism was a product of the political right. In late 19th century France, for example, the infamous Dreyfus affair was instigated by ultra-conservative politicians and by Christian clerics, while Dreyfus's defenders and supporters, such as the liberal journalist Émile Zola, came from the political left. Also during World War II, the far-right Nazi puppet regime in Vichy France went far beyond what the Nazis demanded of them in terms of Jewish deportations to Nazi death camps, and willingly, that is, willingly collaborated with the Nazis in the annihilation of tens of thousands of French Jews during the Holocaust. So too in 19th century England. It was the Conservative Party that for many years opposed Jewish political emancipation and the right of Jews to serve in Parliament and to pursue university studies at Oxford or Cambridge. During the 1930s, it was Oswald Mosley's far-right Union of British Fascists that incited anti-Semitic violence in Jewish neighborhoods of London. Since 1945, however, British and French anti-Semitism, as anti-Semitism in several other Western European countries, has been much more prevalent and vocal on the political left. This has been an important change in the source of contemporary European anti-Semitism that needs to be better remembered and better understood. Thank you.